I never thought I'd become a regular at a donut shop at 3 a.m., much less develop a weird little crush on the guy who baked them. But here I am, telling you about the weirdest, sweetest routine I've accidentally fallen into. It all started one night when I couldn't sleep, and now, the night shift baker at this 24/7 donut joint is the only person I see besides my own reflection. So yeah, picture this. It's 3 a.m., the streets are empty except for the occasional car speeding through, and I'm sitting at the counter of this tiny neon-lit donut shop called Round the Clock. It's the kind of place that looks a little rough on the outside, with a flickering sign and some cracked tiles by the door, but somehow, the smell of fresh glaze and cinnamon keeps pulling me back. I guess there's something comforting about a place that doesn't sleep, even when the whole city does. The first time I showed up, I didn't expect much. I was just out of a terrible day, restless and hungry, craving something sweet and warm. I walked in, and that's when I met him, Jamie. He was the guy behind the counter, wearing a flour-smudged apron and a baseball cap pulled low enough to shadow those eyes that somehow looked both tired and kind. He had this quiet way about him, like he was more comfortable with dough than with people, but when he smiled, which wasn't often, it lit up the whole shop. Jamie was the night shift baker, the reason this place stayed open all night. When I first sat down, he was alone, the only other soul around apart from the hum of the ovens and the clatter of trays. I was his only customer. For weeks, I kept coming back, not just for the donuts, which, by the way, were pretty amazing, but because I started to look forward to his presence. It was strange how someone who barely talked could feel so important. Our interactions were simple at first. He'd ask what I wanted, I'd mumble something about whatever was fresh, and then he'd nod and disappear into the kitchen for a few minutes. Sometimes he'd toss me a quick joke or ask if I wanted coffee. Nothing complicated, just a quiet exchange that filled the silence of the night. But over time, those moments started to mean more. One night, I showed up later than usual, and the shop was darker than normal. I found Jamie sitting on a stool behind the counter, looking worn out. I asked if everything was okay, and he told me about the long hours, the loneliness, the stuff he didn't usually say to anyone else. It was the first time he let his guard down. That night, the donut shop didn't just feel like a place to grab a snack. It felt like a little world where two people who didn't totally fit in anywhere else found each other. And honestly, I wasn't sure if it was the sugar or the quiet companionship, but something was definitely starting to change. I never expected to fall for the guy who baked donuts at 3 a.m., but somehow, that's exactly what happened. And trust me, this story isn't just about a guy and his donuts. It's about finding connection in the most unexpected places, and maybe, just maybe, finding a little sweetness in the middle of the night. After that night, something shifted between us, though we never said it out loud. Jamie didn't suddenly start opening up like a book, but the walls around him felt thinner, like I was finally allowed to peek in a little. And honestly, that was enough for me. I started showing up not just because I was hungry or couldn't sleep, but because I wanted to see him, and maybe because I hoped he wanted to see me too. One evening, or rather early morning, I pulled up to Round the Clock just as Jamie was wiping down the counter. He looked up, surprised to see me, and for a second, I thought I caught a flicker of something behind those dark eyes. "Hey," he said, voice low but steady. "Hey," I replied, sliding onto a stool. "Thought I'd drop by a little earlier tonight." He nodded, like that was a good enough reason not to question it. I watched him for a minute, how his hands moved with easy precision over the trays, dusting powdered sugar like it was second nature. I think that's when I realized how much I admired the quiet rhythm of his world, how he made this lonely night shift feel less empty just by being there. "So what's the story with you?" I asked, half teasing, half serious. Jamie's face twitched, a little smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "You're always here when no one else is," he shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Night shift pays better," he said. "And I like the quiet, less drama." I laughed. "Sounds like a smart move." He glanced at me, his eyes softer than usual. "You ever think about working nights?" I shook my head. "No way. I'd lose my mind." "But you make it look kind of peaceful." Jamie leaned in a bit, lowering his voice. "It's peaceful when someone's around." That caught me off guard. I blinked, trying to act casual, but inside my heart was doing some weird little flip. It was like he just admitted something that hung between us from the start, but neither of us dared say. We settled into an easy silence after that, the kind that doesn't feel awkward because it's shared. I sipped my coffee while Jamie pulled a fresh tray of glazed donuts out of the oven, the steam curling up and filling the air with that familiar sweet smell. There was something kind about seeing him in his element, hands dusted with flour, focused on his craft and yet somehow still aware of me sitting there. Over the next few weeks, our late-night visits became more of a habit than I expected. Sometimes I'd come in just to find Jamie leaning against the counter, waiting for me, and other times he'd be buried in flour and sugar. But always, there was this quiet understanding growing between us. No pressure, no big declarations, just these little moments that felt important. One night, I showed up to find him in a rare mood to talk. We ended up sitting on the worn-out bench outside the shop, the neon sign buzzing softly above us. It was the kind of night where the city seemed to hold its breath, quiet and still. "You ever think about leaving this place?" I asked him, watching a car flash by in the distance. He looked down at his hands. "Sometimes. But it's hard. This job's stable. Keeps me out of trouble." "Out of trouble, huh?" He gave a half smile. "Yeah, I've had my share. I didn't press. Some things people only share when they're ready." Instead, I told him about my own messy past, about the nights I spent wandering, trying to outrun my own mistakes. It felt strange, but good, telling him things I'd never said out loud before. Jamie listened like it mattered, and when I was done, he said, "Maybe that's why we both end up here at night, trying to find something steady." For the first time, I caught a real look in his eyes, like he was searching for something too. Maybe even hope. Then, just like that, the moment was broken by the sound of the shop door jingling. A couple of drunk college kids stumbled in, breaking the spell, reminding us that the world kept turning, even when it felt like it stood still for us. Jamie stood up, dusted his hands, and grinned. "Well, duty calls." I smiled back, but my insides were buzzing. That night was different. It was like we'd crossed some invisible line, the one between strangers and something more. A few nights later, I finally worked up the nerve to ask him if he wanted to grab a coffee after a shift. He hesitated, which was new for him, but then nodded. We ended up at a little 24-hour cafe down the street, sitting across from each other in a booth that felt way too small for the nerves I was trying to hide. The conversation was stilted at first. Jamie wasn't the most talkative guy, and I'm not exactly a smooth charmer, but there was a warmth between us that didn't need perfect words. We shared stories about our favorite foods, bad dates, and the music we listened to when no one else was around. It felt like a quiet discovery, like peeling back layers you didn't even realize were there. When he laughed, this soft, genuine sound that caught me off guard, I knew I was hooked. By the time the sun started creeping up, we were still there, two guys who had found something rare in the middle of the night, a connection. Walking back to the donut shop, I realized I didn't want those moments to end. I wanted to keep chasing this strange, sweet feeling that started with flour-dusted hands and late-night coffee runs. I don't know where this is going yet, but I'm pretty sure it's the beginning of something I didn't see coming. And honestly, I'm kind of glad about that. After that morning, things started to feel different between Jamie and me, like the air had shifted in a way I couldn't fully explain. We weren't officially anything, not yet anyway, but the casual visits to the donut shop and late-night coffees took on a new energy, something a little more hopeful, a little more charged. I remember one night in particular. I showed up around 2:30 a.m., earlier than usual, and the shop was quiet except for the faint hum of the ovens. Jamie was already there, kneading dough with that focused look he always had, and I could tell he'd been working hard all night. His sleeves were rolled up, the soft glow of the neon sign outside making his face look softer somehow. I took my usual seat at the counter, and he glanced up, his expression momentarily unreadable before settling into a small smile. "Hey," I said, sliding $1 across for a coffee. "Hey," he replied, wiping his hands on his apron before pouring the coffee. "You're early tonight." "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. Thought I'd check on the best donut baker in town. Jamie let out a low chuckle. Flattery will get you nowhere. I grinned, but my stomach tightened a little. I didn't want to sound like I was just joking around. I wanted him to know that I cared, that I was interested in more than just the donuts. He handed me the coffee, and for a moment, our hands brushed. It was quick, but enough to send a spark through me. So, Jamie said, leaning against the counter and looking at me more seriously now, what's really up? You've been here a lot lately. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. I guess I like the company. He raised an eyebrow. Is that all? I hesitated, then decided to take a risk. Maybe not. Jamie's eyes held mine longer this time, like he was trying to read between the lines. Then, almost like he couldn't help himself, he asked, do you want to get out of here sometime? Like, not just for coffee after my shift, but maybe dinner? Or, something else. My heart jumped. I wasn't expecting that, but I wasn't going to lie. I'd been thinking about it too. Yeah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'd like that. He smiled. A real, genuine smile that made the shadows under his eyes disappear for a moment. Cool. It's a date. We didn't say much more after that. The ovens were calling and the dough wasn't going to wait. But as I left the shop that morning, the city was just starting to wake up. And I felt like maybe, just maybe, something good was finally happening for me. The next few days were a blur of nerves and anticipation. I caught myself glancing at my phone more than usual, wondering if Jamie would text or call. He didn't. Not immediately. But when he did, it was casual and simple, like nothing was different except that everything was. The night of our date finally came, and I showed up at the little Mexican place Jamie suggested. Not anything fancy, just somewhere with good food and a relaxed vibe. He was already there when I arrived, looking a bit more put together than usual in a dark hoodie and jeans. His smile warmed me instantly. We ordered chips and salsa and talked about nothing and everything all at once. Jamie told me about his childhood, how he'd grown up in a small town and moved here to the city chasing a dream of becoming a chef. I told him about my own messy family, the times I got lost trying to find my way. There was a moment when our hands brushed across the table, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I held his gaze, and for once, neither of us felt like we needed to hide. After dinner, we walked down the quiet streets, the city lights flickering off puddles from a recent rain. Jamie stopped outside a bookstore, and without thinking, I reached over and squeezed his hand. Hey, I said softly. Hey, he replied, turning to look at me. I'm glad you came. Me too. That night, as I lay in bed afterward, I couldn't stop replaying the way his hand felt in mine and the way his smile reached his eyes. I was falling for him, and it scared me and thrilled me all at once. But life, as always, has a way of complicating things. A week later, I showed up at the donut shop like I always did, expecting to see Jamie. Instead, the shop was dark, the sign off, and a note taped to the window. Closed for renovations. Will reopen soon. I stared at it, my stomach sinking. I tried calling Jamie, but no answer. I left a message, waiting for that crackle of his voice to fill the silence. Days passed with no word. I started to worry, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. Was he moving away? Did something happen to him? The thought of losing my late-night companion was crushing. On the 5th day, I finally saw him. He was sitting on the stoop of the closed shop, looking more tired than ever, eyes distant. When he saw me, he gave a small, tired smile. Hey, I said, sitting beside him. Hey, he replied, voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to ask what was going on, but the heaviness in the air stopped me. Instead, I just sat there, letting silence stretch between us. After a long moment, Jamie finally spoke. I had to take a break. Things got complicated. Complicated how? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Family stuff, work stuff. Needed to step back before I burned out. I nodded, understanding more than I let on. You don't have to go through it alone, you know. Jamie looked at me then, eyes searching. You sure? Yeah. For the first time, it felt like we were on the same side, facing whatever came next together. I didn't know what the future held for us, or for that little donut shop. But I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to let go. not of Jamie, not of what was starting between us. And somehow, even in the quiet chaos, that felt like enough to hold on to. We ended up sitting there on that stoop for a while, the cool night air wrapping around us like a quiet hug. Jamie's shoulders looked heavier than usual, and I could tell he was fighting an internal battle he didn't want to share yet. But I wasn't going anywhere, and maybe that was what he needed most. Want to grab a coffee? Inside or somewhere else? I finally asked, hoping to break the silence. He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, that sounds good. We walked a few blocks to a little diner that was open all night. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly, and the smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. We slid into a booth, and I watched Jamie carefully as he stared at the menu like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. You don't have to do this alone, Jamie, I said quietly. If you want to talk about whatever's going on, I'm here. No pressure. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability that wasn't hidden behind jokes or quiet withdrawal. It's just family stuff, he said. My mom's been sick, worse than she let on. I didn't want to worry anyone, so I kept working like nothing was wrong. I could see the weight of it pressing down on him. The exhaustion, the guilt, the loneliness. Jesus, Jamie, that sounds really tough. He nodded, eyes glossy. Yeah, and I felt like I had to be strong for everyone, but I'm not sure I am. Without thinking, I reached across the table and took his hand. It was rough and calloused from years in the kitchen, but warm. You don't have to be strong all the time. Let me be strong for you sometimes. He squeezed my hand back, a small, grateful smile breaking through. Thanks. That means a lot. We sat there, fingers intertwined, sipping coffee until the early morning light crept through the windows. It was one of those rare moments where everything outside the diner faded away, and it was just the two of us, real and raw. After that night, our connection deepened. Jamie started opening up more, letting me in on the small victories and the hard days. I did my best to be steady for him, showing up at the diner after his shifts or inviting him over to my place for home-cooked meals, which, fair warning, I was way better at reheating frozen pizza than actual cooking. One night, while we were making a mess in the kitchen, Jamie laughed at my attempt to flip a pancake. It was a light, genuine laugh, and it filled the room in a way I hadn't heard from him before. You're a disaster, he teased, but his eyes were warm. Hey, I'm a work in progress. I shot back with a grin. That kind of easy teasing became our new normal. The weight of everything didn't disappear, but we found moments of joy between the cracks. And those moments were everything. But the world outside wasn't quite ready to let us have it all just yet. One evening, as Jamie and I sat on my couch watching some random show, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and froze. The screen lit up with his mom's name. Everything okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jamie's jaw tightened. Not really. She's been admitted to the hospital. It's serious. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away, his face tight with worry. I have to go, he said, standing up abruptly. Let me come with you. I offered without hesitation. Jamie looked at me like I'd just surprised him. After a moment, he nodded. Yeah, I'd like that. At the hospital, we sat in the sterile waiting room, the smell of disinfectant sharp and cold against the warmth I felt holding his hand. Jamie's face was pale, strained, but there was something fierce in his eyes, a stubborn hope. We didn't talk much. Words felt useless in the face of uncertainty, but being there, together, felt like a lifeline. Later that night, Jamie finally broke down in my arms, the tough exterior slipping away as tears came unbidden. I'm scared, he whispered. I'm here, I said, holding him tight. We'll get through this together. Those words felt small against the enormity of it all, but they were true. And in that moment, I realized how much Jamie had come to mean to me, not just as the night shift baker or the guy with the quiet smile, but as someone I wanted in my life through the good and the bad. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits, late-night talks, and stolen moments of tenderness. Jamie's mom was fighting hard, and so was he. Watching him care for his family with such fierce dedication made me respect him even more. One night, after a long day at the hospital, Jamie and I walked through the city streets, the neon lights reflecting off wet pavement. He stopped, pulled me close and kissed me. It was soft and tentative at first, then deeper, like he was pouring all his hope and fear into that one moment. When we pulled apart, he looked at me with those dark eyes, full of something I couldn't quite name. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, voice rough, "but I want you in it." I smiled, feeling my heart swell. I want that too. In the midst of all the uncertainty, that felt like the most real thing in the world. And honestly, for the first time in a long time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The weeks that followed were like a blur, a mix of hospital waiting rooms, late-night conversations, and those small, quiet moments that somehow kept us afloat. Jamie was there, fighting alongside his mom, and I was there, trying to be the steady presence he needed, even when I wasn't sure I had much steadiness left myself. One night, after a particularly long day at the hospital, Jamie and I found ourselves back at the donut shop. The renovations were finally done, and the sign outside buzzed softly, welcoming the night owl crowd again. The shop was empty except for us, the soft glow of the ovens casting warm light on his flour-streaked face. He was kneading dough, but his hands moved slower than usual, like he was carrying more than just the weight of the flour. I pulled up a stool at the counter and watched him for a moment before saying, "You okay?" Jamie didn't answer right away. Finally, he looked over, eyes tired but determined. "It's been a hell of a few weeks. Mom's stable, but it's not over yet." I nodded, feeling the knot in my chest tighten. "I'm glad you're here." He smiled, that same soft smile that had kept me coming back to this place night after night. Me too. It was quiet between us for a while. Then, Jamie reached across the counter and took my hand, the same way he had weeks ago in that diner when everything felt fragile but real. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd find someone who'd stick around through all this." "Well," I shrugged with a grin, "I have a thing for doughy late-night bakers." He laughed, a sound so genuine I hadn't heard it in a while. "You're ridiculous, but also kind of amazing if you hadn't noticed." I teased. He rolled his eyes but didn't pull away. That night, as we cleaned up the shop together, Jamie finally let some of his guard down. He talked about what it was like growing up, the pressure of family expectations, and how baking was his way of finding control in a world that often felt chaotic. "I guess that's why I like the night shift so much," he said, eyes distant. "The city sleeps, and it's just me and the dough. No distractions, no fake smiles." I nodded, understanding more than he probably realized. "Sometimes, I think I envy you. You've got your own rhythm, your own little world." Jamie glanced at me and smiled. "Maybe we can find a rhythm together." The words hung between us, real and heavy with meaning. Over the next few days, our relationship grew in those small, unspoken ways. Shared breakfasts, quiet mornings, and the comfort of knowing someone had your back. Jamie wasn't just the night shift baker anymore. He was my person. But life had its way of testing us. One evening, as Jamie was locking up the shop, his phone rang. He stepped outside to take the call, and I could see the tension immediately. After a few minutes, he came back inside, face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked. He shook his head. "It's my mom. She's taken a turn for the worse." The following hours were a whirlwind. We rushed to the hospital, the sterile halls and blinking machines a stark contrast to the warmth of the donut shop. Jamie held his mom's hand, whispering words I couldn't hear but could feel, the weight of love, fear, and hope. I stayed by his side, holding him when he broke, offering whatever comfort I could in the midst of uncertainty. Days turned into nights, and nights blurred into each other. Jamie barely left the hospital, and the exhaustion began to show in the way he moved, the way his eyes lost their usual spark. One night, I found him sitting alone in the waiting room, head in his hands. "Jamie," I said softly, kneeling beside him. He looked up, eyes red and tired. "I don't know if I can do this." "You're not alone," I reminded him, squeezing his hand. "We'll get through it, together." For the first time, Jamie let himself lean on me, breaking down in a way that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. In that moment, I realized love wasn't just about the good times or stolen kisses in a donut shop at 3 a.m. It was about showing up when things got messy, when hope felt distant, and when all you have is each other. Weeks later, Jamie's mom stabilized. It wasn't a miracle, but it was enough. A fragile, tentative victory. We returned to the donut shop one quiet night, the familiar smell of sugar and yeast wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. Jamie flipped a fresh batch of donuts onto a tray, his hands steady again, but this time, his smile was different, wider, less guarded. He looked over at me and said, "Thanks for staying." I smiled back. Always. That night, as we closed up the shop together, I realized how much had changed and how much stayed the same. The city still slept around us. The neon signs still flickered, and the ovens still hummed. But now there was something new in the air, a promise that no matter what came next, we wouldn't face it alone. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. A few weeks after Jamie's mom's health stabilized, life started settling into a new kind of normal for us. The donut shop was back in full swing, the ovens humming through the night, and the city's quiet hours once again filled with the soft glow of neon and the smell of fresh glaze. But what felt different was the space we had carved out for ourselves, a little corner of the world where messy stuff was okay, and care wasn't just a word, but something you could feel. One night, near the end of my usual visit, Jamie wiped his hands on his apron and looked over at me with that soft, steady gaze I'd come to know so well. "You want to close up early? Maybe grab a late breakfast somewhere?" I smiled, feeling that familiar flutter in my chest. "Yeah, I'd like that." After locking the doors, we walked down the quiet streets to a small cafe that was opening its doors for the early risers. Sitting across from each other with steaming plates of eggs and toast between us, we talked about everything and nothing, plans, fears, the weird little moments that made life feel worth it. There was no pressure, no grand declarations, just two people content in each other's presence. As we left the cafe, the first rays of dawn painting the sky, Jamie slipped his hand into mine. It felt natural, like the missing piece I didn't even know I'd been looking for. For once, neither of us had to hide behind jokes or quiet smiles. We were just two people, messy and imperfect, who had found something real in the middle of the night. Walking back to the shop, I realized how much this little routine, this strange late-night connection, had changed me. I'd come to the donut shop looking for something sweet, but I'd found something sweeter, someone who understood that life isn't about perfection, but about showing up, even when it's hard. Jamie squeezed my hand gently and whispered, "Thanks for sticking around." And I knew I'd stick around for all the nights, all the mornings, all the moments in between, because sometimes the simplest things, the smell of dough, a shared coffee, a hand held in the dark, are enough to make everything feel a little more like home.